Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an article from the front page of the Delhi edition. The Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI has come out with its latest monetary policy. The Monetary Policy Committee, that is headed by the Governor of the RBI, has decided to adopt an accommodative stance, and it has retained the key policy rate, that is the repo rate, unchanged at 4%. But before we understand this in detail, first let's take a look at the basics. See, monetary policy is nothing but the control of money supply in the market. And the task of regulating the money supply falls with the RBI because the RBI is responsible for ensuring price stability. So the Reserve Bank of India has been vested with a twofold objective. On one side, it has to promote economic growth through its monetary policy, and on the other hand, it has to contain inflation within manageable levels in order to ensure that the common man doesn't feel the impact of price fluctuation. So by now, it should be quite obvious to you that promoting economic growth and controlling inflation are conflicting objectives. For promoting economic growth, you need more money supply in the market. Because when there is more money supply, credit is easily available at cheaper rates to the investors, and this naturally drives up investments and further economic growth. But on the other hand, if money supply is in excess, then demand will shoot up beyond the capabilities of the supply side. And when there is a huge mismatch in the demand-supply equation, it will result in a price rise leading to inflation. So it is through the monetary policy that the RBI and its Monetary Policy Committee control and regulate the money supply in the economy, so that a fine balance can be struck between promoting growth and controlling inflation. And the key policy tool available to the Monetary Policy Committee to control money supply is the repo rate. Repo rate is nothing but the rate at which the RBI lends money to the commercial banks. So if this rate is increased by the RBI, then it will reduce borrowing by the banks and thereby increase the cost of credit. So when the borrowing cost increases, it acts as a disincentive for investments and thereby affects economic growth. But however, lesser money supply will reduce demand and thereby help in stabilizing inflation. And the exact opposite happens when repo rate is decreased. When repo rate is reduced, commercial banks tend to borrow more from the RBI and provide for cheaper loans, thereby driving up investments and economic growth. But as money supply increases, the demand will shoot up, and if the supply side is not able to match up to the demand, then the mismatch in the demand-supply equation will increase inflation. Hence, we say that balancing the needs of promoting growth and containing inflation is a conflicting objective for the RBI. So based on the macroeconomic conditions that are prevalent in the economy, the Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI takes a judicious decision to strike a balance between promoting growth and controlling inflation. Currently, the Indian economy is facing a twin challenge. On one hand, economic growth has reduced drastically, and in fact, GDP growth has contracted to the negative territory. This drastic fall in India's GDP growth is a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent lockdown, and it is also a result of the pre-pandemic weakness that already existed in the Indian economy. Along with this, the Indian economy is facing the twin challenge of rising inflation. And as per latest data provided by the RBI, inflation has already shot up to more than 7%, which is not just way above the inflation target that has been prescribed to the Monetary Policy Committee, that is 4%, but it is also outside the range that has been prescribed to the Monetary Policy Committee, according to which inflation should be contained within a range of 2% to 6%. So to deal with these extraordinary circumstances, the RBI and the Monetary Policy Committee has been adopting a pro-growth strategy since March, that is since the pandemic broke out and since the lockdowns were imposed. And as a result, over the last 8 to 9 months, the repo rate has been reduced by nearly 115 basis points. So this consistent reduction in the repo rate, accompanied with policy support from the government, has somewhat helped in reviving economic growth in the last 2 quarters, which had stagnated and dropped to the negative territory as a result of the pandemic and the lockdown. Earlier in October, the RBI had predicted India's GDP to be around minus 9.5% for this fiscal year. But thanks to the slow economic recovery that India has been witnessing in the last few months, the GDP forecast has been revised to minus 7.5%. In the coming quarters, that is the third and the fourth quarter of the financial year, the RBI expects India to register at least positive growth of around 0.1 to 0.7%. And this ongoing slow economic recovery has provided the Monetary Policy Committee the opportunity to strike a balance between growth and inflation. That's the reason why, during the latest monetary policy review, the RBI has decided to retain the repo rate at 4% by adopting an accommodative stance. This means that the Monetary Policy Committee would be ready to accommodate any emerging needs of the economy in the future. When an accommodative stance is adopted, if there is a need for promoting growth, then immediately the repo rates can be reduced. Then on the other hand, if inflation continues to persist at higher levels, then the Monetary Policy Committee can immediately increase the repo rate to reduce the money supply in order to contain inflation. So the Monetary Policy Review indicates that India is witnessing a gradual economic recovery following the breakout of the pandemic and the months of lockdown that were imposed at the beginning of the financial year. There are several factors which have been aiding economic growth in the last few months, and this includes the easing of the lockdown restrictions by the central and the state governments, the relative success being registered by vaccine trials in the country, and the expected rollout of vaccines around the country. Just yesterday, the Prime Minister has indicated that vaccine trials are at a very advanced stage, and very soon India might be rolling out vaccines just like the United Kingdom. Along with this, the slowdown in the spread of the pandemic and the reduction in the number of cases has contributed to a major boost in the consumer sentiment and as well as in the business and investor sentiment. Available data shows that consumer demand is coming back to normalcy, and this has pushed the investors and the businesses to bring in investments to boost supply in line with the rise in consumer demand. See, quite frankly, this has to be one of the gravest economic challenges that India has faced in the recent past. As soon as the pandemic broke out and India imposed a nationwide lockdown, growth and economic activity across all sectors came to a complete standstill for at least 2 to 3 months. So from March to May, growth in the Indian economy had plunged into the negative territory, and there was not just a sudden drop in consumer demand, but there was also a sudden impact on the supply because of the lockdown restrictions on industrial activity. The sudden lockdown altered consumer behavior and it wiped out demand for a number of durable products. Plus, the lockdown restrictions significantly affected transport, movement, logistics, and the availability of raw materials, thereby affecting manufacturing and industrial activity. And amongst all the sectors, the services sector was hit very hard, especially hospitality, tourism, airline industry, etc. So the first few months of this financial year has been a complete wipeout for the Indian economy, and as a result, India is going to witness very low rates of growth in this financial year. Earlier, the RBI had forecasted India's GDP growth to be at a historic low of minus 9.5%. But due to the ongoing slow recovery, the forecast has been revised to minus 7.5% for this financial year. So the impact of the pandemic and the lockdown is still going to persist for a number of quarters. But along with these low growth numbers, things have become very complicated for India because of persistent high inflation that is being registered in the last few months. The high inflation condition is primarily being driven by the supply side shock because the sudden drop in supply side activity affected production, and as demand started to increase following the easing of lockdown restrictions, the supply side has not been able to match up to the demand. So it might take many more months before a balance is struck between the demand and supply equation. So for the coming few quarters, inflation is expected to be quite high, and this represents the twin challenges being faced by the Indian economy. On one side, we have low economic growth and industrial and manufacturing activity struggling to recover, and on the other hand, we have persistent high inflation. So dealing with these two challenges simultaneously is quite a challenge for the Monetary Policy Committee, and it severely restricts the monetary policy options that are available for it. Hence, by keeping all the macroeconomic conditions in mind, the Monetary Policy Committee has decided to adopt an accommodative stance and retain repo rate at 4%. Next, we shall look at a related article on page number 14. The Reserve Bank of India has come out with a fresh set of regulations in order to increase its oversight of non-banking financial companies and large urban cooperative banks. These fresh regulatory mechanisms have been designed to bring in greater transparency in the functioning of NBFCs and large urban cooperative banks. Because of late, there have been a number of cases wherein fraud and irregularities have been reported in NBFCs and urban cooperative banks. This is largely to do with the poor quality of reporting and the lack of transparency in the audits. In the recent past, we have seen a number of NBFCs and urban cooperative banks being hit by scandals, such as the crisis faced by the Punjab and Maharashtra Cooperative Bank. Most of these scandals that have hit the banking and the financial sector has been an outcome of poor governance, lack of transparency and accountability. So in order to improve the reporting standards and the accounting standards, the RBI has come out with a fresh set of regulatory mechanisms in order to strengthen its oversight over NBFCs and UCBs. As a part of these measures, the RBI has introduced risk-based internal audits, which places the onus of accountability and audits on the NBFCs and the UCBs. And this is expected to act as the first line of defense against any financial irregularities and fraud. And this is also expected to enhance the monitoring of these institutions by the RBI. The RBI has also brought out a fresh set of guidelines in order to harmonize the existing guidelines with regard to the appointment of statutory auditors. Earlier, there was a conflict of interest with regard to the appointment of independent auditors, and the new guidelines of the RBI is expected to harmonize the existing guidelines with regard to the appointment of these independent statutory auditors. And this is expected to improve governance, transparency and accountability with regard to the functioning of NBFCs and large urban cooperative banks. See, today, these non-banking financial companies and large urban cooperative banks, they have become an integral part of the banking and financial ecosystem. Their enhanced scope of operations has created a lot of interlinkages in the economy, and any risk or failure faced by these institutions represents a systemic risk, as it could have a spillover effect and impact the entire banking and financial sector. So by keeping these risks in mind, the RBI has come out with fresh regulations and guidelines in order to improve the quality of reporting and independent audits. And this will not only enhance the supervision of these institutions by the RBI, but it will also improve the quality and the transparency of internal audits. Then apart from this, the RBI has also brought out a few guidelines for enhancing security and convenience with regard to digital payments. See, the digital payment ecosystem in the country has really taken off after demonetization and the sustained push that the government and the RBI have given to the adoption of digital payments. But the exponential increase in the adoption of digital payments represents a major security risk, and hence, in order to improve the security standards and make the usage of these platforms more convenient to the users, the RBI has come out with the Digital Payment Security Controls Directions. These digital payment security control directions have to be mandatorily followed by all the banks and financial institutions that are offering digital payment services, such as UPI-based banking, net banking, credit card transactions, etc. In the interest of enhancing data security and cybersecurity, the RBI has called upon all the banks and the financial institutions to invest more in strengthening their IT infrastructure and their cybersecurity measures. Recently, for example, the RBI directed HDFC to stop issuing credit cards and stop a few digital payment services because of its failure to boost and ramp up its IT infrastructure. So the RBI has been pushing banks and financial institutions to adopt better security practices by improving their IT infrastructure and by adopting better cybersecurity standards in order to improve the safety and security of digital payments ecosystem. Then finally, the RBI governor has issued an important clarification with regard to a recent recommendation that was made by one of the committees that was constituted by the RBI. In June 2020, the RBI had set up an internal committee or an internal panel to review the ownership patterns of private banks in India. This panel had recommended that corporate houses and industrial houses should be allowed to open their own banks in order to deepen banking and financial services in the country. This recommendation of the RBI panel has both advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that if corporates and industrial houses are allowed to open banks, it will help in deepening the banking and financial services in the country. But at the same time, the disadvantage is that This represents a major conflict of interest and it could result in an increase in banking frauds and scams. So, with regard to the implementation of the recommendation of this panel, the RBI governor has said that the central bank is adopting a wait and watch approach and the recommendations of the committee has been placed in the public domain to receive feedback and comments from the industry and from the public. And based on this feedback received from all the stakeholders, the RBI shall be taking a judicious decision at a later date. Now let's take up another article from page number 1 that helps us understand the state of relations between India and Canada. See, of late, India-Canada relations have been facing a number of hurdles and now a new issue has been added. Recently, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made a very controversial statement concerning India's internal affairs. The Canadian Prime Minister expressed public support to the ongoing farmers' protest in India and he called upon the Indian government to uphold its democratic constitutional obligation of supporting the fundamental right to freedom of protest. The Canadian Prime Minister stated that Canada will always stand up for the right to peaceful protest anywhere in the world, and he called upon the Indian government to engage with the farmers in order to address their genuine concerns. So this controversial statement of the Canadian Prime Minister on India's internal matters has triggered an angry response from India. India's Ministry of External Affairs has called this as an unacceptable interference in India's internal affairs, and the MEA had even summoned the Canadian High Commissioner, and he has also been issued a démarche as per diplomatic protocols, and India has made it very clear that any such open interference by Canada in India's internal matters would directly have a bearing on the bilateral relationship. Along with this development, a number of protests have been witnessed in Canada as well, wherein the Indo-Canadian community, which sympathizes with the farmers of Punjab and Haryana, have staged demonstrations in front of the Indian High Commission and consulates in Canada. Apart from this latest issue, the other long-pending issue in the India-Canada relationship is the Khalistan issue. And both these issues are connected to the strong Sikh diaspora, which happens to be politically very influential in Canada. See, the Khalistan movement is an insurgent and terrorist movement that dates back to the 1980s and 1990s. Under the Khalistan movement, a few radical Khalistan extremists were seeking to liberate the Indian state of Punjab and establish this region as an independent country known as Khalistan. This insurgent terrorist movement was openly backed by Pakistan's ISI from across the border, and it also received active support from some of the radical elements amongst the Sikh diaspora located in multiple countries abroad. A few radical extremists amongst the Sikh diaspora, they sympathized with the Khalistan cause, and this created a strong foreign base for the Khalistan movement in a number of countries including the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Germany, France, Italy, etc. So few radical members of the Sikh diaspora, with the support of Pakistan's ISI, they were instrumental in creating this foreign support for the Khalistan insurgent terrorist movement witnessed in the Indian state of Punjab. In these countries, a strong base for the Khalistan movement had been set up by the extremist outfits, and Khalistan-based terror groups such as the Babar Khalsa International, the Khalistan Tiger Force, Khalistan Zindabad Force, etc., they all established a strong base in these countries. Unfortunately, these radical elements misused the Gurudwaras in these countries and they turned them into bases for Khalistan extremists. And in most cases, these foreign governments were turning a blind eye to the extremist activists of the Khalistanis despite repeated requests from India to act against them. When the Khalistan movement was at its peak during the 1980s and 1990s, there were a number of terror attacks as well that originated from Canada. This included the bombing of a Air India flight, Air Kanishka, which resulted in the death of more than 300 passengers. Finally, after these major incidents of terror and after Indian diplomatic pressure, Canadian authorities, they finally started acting upon Khalistan extremists. But the support base for the Khalistan cause has always existed in Canada. A few extremist elements in the Sikh diaspora have also remained very influential within the Canadian government and with Canada's political parties, and this has always been a source of friction in the India-Canada relationship. Recently in 2018, there was one such incident which flared up and had a significant impact on the bilateral relations. In 2018, when the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was on a visit to India, his prime ministerial delegation included a controversial individual known as Jaspal Atwal, who is a convicted terrorist in India. Back in the 1980s, Jaspal Atwal was a member of the International Sikh Youth Federation, which is a banned terrorist organization under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. He was convicted in the assassination of a Punjab state minister and had later sought refuge in Canada. So his inclusion as a part of the Canadian PM's delegation triggered a major diplomatic incident between India and Canada in 2018. After India neutralized the Khalistan movement in the 1990s by acting both on the domestic front and as well as on the international front, there has always existed a base for few Khalistan sympathizers in Canada. Of late, India has reasons to believe that Pakistan's ISI is trying to revive the dormant movement by sponsoring the remnants of the Khalistan movement to run campaigns on social media platforms. One such online campaign is the call for a Khalistan 2020 referendum, which enjoys considerable support amongst the Khalistan sympathizers based out of Canada. So these radical elements, who have been working with the support of Pakistan's ISI, have always posed a significant national security challenge for India, and India has always insisted that the Canadian government and the Canadian authorities should act against these extremists. So the Khalistan issue and the limited support by few radical elements within the Sikh diaspora has always been a hurdle and source of friction in the India-Canada relationship. And now, the public comments made by the Canadian Prime Minister in support of the farmers' protests has invited an angry response from India, and it highlights the state of relations between India and Canada. Now let's take up a column from page number 7, which helps us understand the implementation of the government's flagship ICDS program, or the Integrated Child Development Services Program, by taking a case study from Rajasthan. See, the ICDS program traces back its origin to 1975, and it is the primary initiative of the government to provide for basic nutrition, including basic food, essential nutrients and medicines to women and children. The beneficiaries of this scheme includes pregnant women, lactating women, and as well as adolescent children up to the age of 6 years. So this program of the Government of India is the key to ensuring the nutrition of women and children by covering the entire life cycle of pregnancy, lactation, and adolescent growth. This program has ensured the food security of pregnant and lactating women and as well as adolescent children, and they are even provided with essential micronutrients and basic medicines. This has been a key program that has helped the government to tackle malnutrition and anemia amongst pregnant and lactating women and as well as amongst children. So in order to improve the delivery of services under the ICDS, in 2018, the Government of India launched a major e-governance initiative. It came out with the ICDS CAS platform, that stands for Common Application Software. This was basically an e-governance initiative that would provide for data-led governance. Under this initiative, the Anganwadi centers and the ASHA workers, who basically provide the delivery of services under the ICDS program, they were provided with tablets and smartphones. The Anganwadi centers and the accredited social health activists, they form the mainstay of the ICDS, and they were provided with smart devices through which they can log in all the essential data regarding beneficiaries, the coverage of the program, progress with regard to nutrition, etc., so that it would enable the state and the central government agencies to efficiently track and monitor the implementation of this ambitious initiative. This e-governance initiative, known as ICDS CAS or Common Application Software, was brought out as an integral part of Poshan Abhiyan, which was launched in 2017 by the government to tackle the needs of nutrition amongst pregnant women and adolescent children. But for the ASHA workers to log the data through tablets and smart devices, they had to rely upon internet connection, and they also had to be trained in collecting quality data and reliable data. Because the entire execution of the program, including tracking and monitoring, would be dependent on the Common Application Software, and when it was introduced, it was seen as a transformative initiative which would provide for data-led governance in the country. But however, the implementation of the Common Application Software has faced numerous problems, especially in the remote rural areas. Since this e-governance initiative is directly dependent on the internet, and since it is also dependent on the quality of the data that is collected by the ASHA workers, the execution of this scheme has been facing a number of problems in the remote rural areas. When the Common Application Software was introduced, the objective of the government was to improve tracking and monitoring of the program in order to provide for better delivery of services. But however, it has been observed that the lack of internet connection in the remote rural areas and the poor quality of the data that is collected by the ASHA workers is directly hampering the implementation of the scheme. So the column is of the opinion that the nutritional services provided through the ICDS has been hampered due to the lack of online data, and this is going to significantly affect pregnant women and adolescent children, especially in a pandemic year which has aggravated the challenges of hunger and poverty. Now let's take up the practice questions for today. The Central Pollution Control Board of India was constituted under which act? The correct answer is option C. It was constituted under the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1974. Now let's take up the next question. Which of the following methods help in curbing air pollution? Strict enforcement of vehicle emission checks, sprinkling of water on roads before sweeping, regulating construction activities. All the three are correct, so option D is the right answer. These two questions related to air pollution and the Central Pollution Control Board were asked because of two related articles on page number 3. According to these articles, the CPCB has stepped up efforts to curb air pollution in the Delhi NCR region, and the National Green Tribunal has directed the authorities, that is the municipal bodies, to sprinkle water on roads before sweeping in order to control the release of dust into the atmosphere. For this purpose, the NGT has directed the municipal bodies to make use of water from sewage treatment plants instead of wasting fresh water. Now let's take up the next question. Which of the following autonomous district councils constituted under the 6th schedule of the Indian Constitution are located in Mizoram? Chakma Autonomous District Council, Dima Hasao Council, the Lai Autonomous District Council, or the Mara Autonomous District Council? The correct answer is option D, 1, 3 and 4 only. The Chakma, Lai and Mara Autonomous District Councils are located in Mizoram. This question has been asked because we have an article on page number 4 that refers to the latest elections that were held to the Lai Autonomous District Council in Mizoram. See, the 6th schedule of the Indian Constitution, along with Article 244, provides for the establishment of autonomous district councils for tribal areas in 4 states, that includes Assam, Meghalaya, Mizoram and Tripura. The scheduled areas in the other states are covered by the 5th schedule, and these autonomous district councils under the 6th schedule, they have been granted with limited autonomy within the ambit of the Indian Constitution. As a result, these autonomous district councils, they enjoy autonomy with regard to few administrative powers, few financial powers, and as well as with regard to few judicial powers. So under the 6th schedule, 10 such autonomous district councils have been set up in these 4 states. This includes the Chakma, Lai and Mara autonomous district councils in Mizoram, the Bodoland, Karbi Anglong and Dima Hasao autonomous district councils in Assam. In Meghalaya, we have the Garo, Kasi and Jaintia autonomous district councils, and in Tripura, we have the Tripura Autonomous District Council. So under the 6th schedule, these are the only 10 autonomous district councils that have been set up because the provisions of the 6th schedule applies only for these 4 states. Whereas in other states, there are autonomous councils such as the Gorkha Land Territorial Council in West Bengal, the Ladakh Autonomous Council in Ladakh, etc. and they have been set up through their own laws. Let's take up the next question. Which of the following statements are correct? The National Commission for Protection of Child Rights is a constitutional body. The Commission can take suo motu cognizance of serious cases of violation of child rights. It has the powers to summon senior officials for any lapses in discharging their duties. Amongst the given statements, the first statement is incorrect because the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights is not a constitutional body. It is a statutory body that has been set up by passing the Commission for Protection of Child Rights Act in 2005. This commission can not only receive complaints, but it can also take suo motu cognizance of any serious offences, and it also has the powers to summon senior officials for any lapses in discharging their duties. So the correct answer is option C, 2 and 3 only. This question has been asked because on page number 4 we have an article which makes a reference to the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights. Now let's take up the next question. Which of the following statements are correct? A passing exercise or PASEX in naval terminology is an exercise done between two navies to ensure that they are able to communicate and cooperate in times of war or humanitarian relief. India conducts such exercises with both United States and Russia. Both the statements are correct. Option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 10, India and Russia have recently held a passage exercise or a PASEX in the East Indian Ocean region. Such passage exercises are also held with the United States, and the main objective is to promote interoperability between the two navies. Now let's look at the next question. Which country has built the HL2N nuclear fusion reactor that is also being referred to as the artificial sun? The correct answer is option D, China. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 13, China has operationalized its nuclear fusion reactor known as HL2N. Let's look at the next question. Which of the following statements are correct? A technical textile is a textile product manufactured for non-aesthetic purposes where its function is the primary criteria. Applications include automotive parts, medical implants, geotextiles that can be used to reinforce embankments in order to prevent soil erosion, agrotextiles that can be used for crop protection, and these technical textiles can also be used to manufacture protective clothing that can resist heat, cuts, and even radiation, stabs, and bullets. Such technical textiles are also used in the manufacturing of space suits as well. Recently, India has launched the National Technical Textiles Mission to support this specialized sector. All the three statements are correct. Option D is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 14, the Ministry of Textiles has invited proposals to establish a dedicated export promotion council for technical textiles. These technical textiles, they are not used for regular clothing. Instead, they are used for their unique functions. As discussed, they have tremendous applications, and hence, to promote the export of technical textiles, India has recently launched the National Technical Textiles Mission. As a part of this mission, the government is looking to set up a dedicated export promotion council in order to boost the exports of technical textiles from India. Now let's take up a question from the 2018 prelims paper. With reference to Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, consider the following statements. It is the flagship scheme of the Ministry of Labour and Employment. It, among other things, will also impart training in soft skills, entrepreneurship, financial and digital literacy. It aims to align the competencies of the unregulated workforce of the country to the National Skill Qualification Framework. Amongst the given statements, the first statement is incorrect because this scheme falls under the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, not the Ministry of Labour and Employment. So the correct answer is option C, 2 and 3 only. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, discuss the growth prospects of the Indian economy and the challenges being faced by it following the breakout of the pandemic and the subsequent lockdown. The second question, India-Canada relations have hit several roadblocks. Elaborate in detail. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. This concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.